The woman no one noticed. They said the gala at the Sequoia Grove Wildlife Reserve would be just another high society fundraiser. Tuxedos, designer gowns, and whispered deals over glasses of vintage wine. But what happened that night was something no one in the room would ever forget. Near the back of the Grand Lodge, beneath strings of warm golden lights and the soft hum of a string quartet, a woman sat alone at a table. No entourage, no champagne, just a stack of documents and a pen. That woman was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. But to most of the guests floating past her, she looked like someone who didn't belong. Maybe staff. Maybe someone who slipped in. Because in that room, power wasn't about what you stood for. It was about who noticed you. And Charlotte Sterling noticed Jasmine, but not for the right reasons. Charlotte was a name in every donor's circle from Manhattan to Napa Valley. She owned foundations, controlled headlines, and could make or break careers with a single phone call. The night of the gala, she wore a crimson gown that shimmered like arrogance itself, and she had no idea the woman she mocked was the reason the entire event even existed. With a smirk, Charlotte leaned toward her diamond-clad companion and said loudly enough for the nearby servers to hear, "Isn't that one of the staffers? Sitting there like she's someone important? Honestly, who lets people like that into Sequoia Grove?" The laughter that followed was low, cruel, the kind that twists inside your stomach when you're the one being laughed at. Jasmine heard every word. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. She just kept reviewing the grant proposals in front of her. Plans that could save endangered wolves in Montana and rebuild lost wetlands in Mississippi. Because while the others sipped $2,000 wine, she was thinking about life. Wild, voiceless life that needed someone to fight for it. But the room didn't know that. Not yet. As the night unfolded, the whispers grew louder. Jasmine sat still, alone, until the moment everything changed. That's when Charlotte made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life and expose just how fragile arrogance really is when faced with quiet power. Have you ever misjudged someone at first glance? Ever said something you couldn't take back? Let us know in the comments. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The moment she crossed the line. Charlotte Sterling didn't believe in silence. She believed in dominance, in being the loudest voice in the room and the first name on every plaque. That night at Sequoia Grove, she was in rare form. Flashbulbs captured her every move. Guests paused their conversations just to greet her. She was used to being the star. But something about Jasmine Crockett, her stillness, her simplicity, rubbed Charlotte the wrong way. Jasmine didn't wear flashy clothes. She wasn't surrounded by wealthy patrons. She wasn't laughing at insider jokes about politics or real estate. She just sat there, working. And that made Charlotte feel small. So she did what people like her often do when they feel threatened. She belittled. As the jazz quartet softened for the keynote speaker announcements, Charlotte took one last sip of her champagne and strutted across the polished oak floors. Her heels clicked with intention. She stopped right in front of Jasmine's table, her voice honeyed but sharp. "You know," she began, her tone wrapped in condescension, "this is a donors event. Most people here understand that. Maybe next time you could try blending in just a little more. You're giving community center vibes." A few guests overheard, some chuckled uncomfortably. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. Jasmine slowly lifted her eyes. No anger, no shame, just calm clarity. She looked at Charlotte the way a thunderstorm might look at a matchstick, not with fear, but with quiet inevitability. "Thank you for the suggestion," Jasmine said gently, before turning her eyes back to her notes. But Charlotte wasn't done. She leaned in, lowering her voice but raising the venom. "Listen, I've worked hard to be here. I've written checks with more zeros than most people here have ever seen. And I won't let some political activist pretending to be a conservationist ruin the tone of this event." There it was, the slip. She thought Jasmine was a prop, a nobody, someone begging for recognition. But the truth was far from that, because Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to impress donors. She had come to protect what couldn't speak for itself. And in less than an hour, her voice would be the only one that mattered in that entire room. Have you ever been judged unfairly just by the way you look or sit in a room? Tell us below. Your story might help someone else feel seen. The quiet before the reckoning. The energy in the room had shifted. You could feel it, like the air had thickened. Conversations dulled. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between notes longer than usual. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise to Charlotte's bait. She didn't need to, because when your purpose is stronger than your pride, silence becomes your greatest power. Across the room, a few staff members exchanged glances. One of them, a young intern who had followed Jasmine's congressional work for years, bit her lip in frustration. She had witnessed the entire exchange, but Jasmine simply sat still, flipping the page of a conservation blueprint outlining a rehabilitation corridor for endangered mountain lions in Colorado. That was her focus, always the mission. Charlotte, on the other hand, rejoined her table, visibly pleased with herself. She crossed her legs with a flourish and leaned back in her chair, basking in the shallow approval of her circle. People who smiled as long as you funded their dreams, but disappeared the moment you stopped shining. Then came the voice over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The room froze. Charlotte's smirk cracked. Heads turned like dominoes. Confused whispers swept across the hall. The woman in the simple black dress, the one Charlotte had mocked just minutes ago, stood up, calm, composed, and began walking toward the stage. Charlotte's face went pale. Her eyes followed Jasmine's every step, slowly realizing the weight of what she had done. Jasmine stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. She saw the surprise. She saw the discomfort. But she didn't flinch, because she hadn't come for applause. She had come for the animals, for the forests, for the oceans, for the future. And her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady, but heavy with truth. "Good evening," she said. "I know many of you didn't expect to hear from me tonight. Maybe you didn't even notice I was here. And that's okay. I didn't come to be seen. I came to speak for those who can't." A hush fell over the room, the kind that holds a mirror up to every face. And in the front row, Charlotte Sterling shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Have you ever witnessed someone get put in their place by nothing but the truth? Share your moment in the comments. We want to hear your voice. Truth that echoes. You could hear a pin drop. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of the stage. No teleprompter, no rehearsed applause lines. Just a voice that carried years of grit, compassion, and the burden of being underestimated. "When I founded the American Wildlife Justice Initiative," she continued, "people told me it was a lost cause, that no one would fund rescue sanctuaries in forgotten corners of Alabama or care about wetlands drying up in Louisiana. But I didn't do this work for headlines. I did it because someone had to." Every eye was on her now, even Charlotte's. The same woman who mocked Jasmine minutes ago was now gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Jasmine went on, her voice unwavering. "This isn't about politics. It's not about prestige. It's about life, about the eagles we nursed back to flight, the wolves we reintroduced to their natural habitats, the children who now see bison roaming where there once was only dust." The words didn't shout, they didn't demand, but they landed like thunder on the hearts of every person listening. Even those who had never heard of her before tonight were now leaning forward, breath held, completely still. She paused for a second, then looked straight at Charlotte, not in anger but in clarity. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you overlook, the ones not asking for your attention, because their eyes are already fixed on the work. A few heads turned toward Charlotte. Her charm had vanished, her confidence drained. What replaced it was a silence she wasn't used to, the silence of truth settling in. "We are not here tonight to celebrate ourselves," Jasmine said softly. "We are here because our planet is gasping, because its creatures are vanishing, and because the ones with the power to help are sitting in this room." The applause didn't come right away. It built slowly from the back, growing like a wave too heavy to hold back. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, others just stunned by how someone so silent all night could suddenly command every soul in the building. Charlotte Sterling didn't clap. Not yet. She couldn't. She was too busy feeling the weight of everything she just realized. And that weight was just beginning. Have you ever seen someone reveal their true strength in a single moment? Tell us in the comments. Your story might inspire someone today. When power isn't loud. As the applause faded into quiet awe, Jasmine stepped down from the stage with the same humility she had brought to the gala. No triumphant smirk, no glance around the room seeking validation, just a calm nod to the event organizers and a quiet return to her table. But the room had changed. The same donors who had earlier ignored her were now waiting in line, waiting to shake her hand, to offer donations, to apologize without saying the word. It was as if the air itself had shifted, thick with unspoken guilt and fresh admiration. Charlotte Sterling sat frozen, her perfectly constructed world cracking around the edges. The woman she had publicly belittled, dismissed as staff, had just schooled a room full of millionaires without raising her voice. And worse, Jasmine hadn't even acknowledged her, because Jasmine didn't need to. That was what cut the deepest. Charlotte watched as people crowded around Jasmine, eager to listen, eager to matter in her mission. She watched as Jasmine bent down to speak to an elderly donor who'd driven 4 hours just to meet her. She watched as a child handed Jasmine a drawing of a fox, and Jasmine smiled like it was the most important document she'd seen all night. And Charlotte, she just sat there. For the first time in a very long time, no one was looking at her. No one asked for a photo. No one wanted her opinion. She could feel the heat rise in her chest, the kind of burn that only shame can cause. Her words from earlier rang in her ears. Maybe next time try blending in. How foolish they sounded now, how shallow, how cruel. The voices around her blurred. Laughter, questions, praise, all for Jasmine. And Charlotte sat in the middle of it all, drowning in a silence that no applause could fill. She wanted to leave, to slip away and pretend none of it happened. But something inside her told her to stay, because running would be easy. Owning up, that was harder. Have you ever felt the sting of your own arrogance? Ever wished you could take back something you said? Let us know in the comments. You're not alone. The apology no one expected. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the tall sequoias, but inside the Grand Lodge, the air had grown still, like the room itself was holding its breath. Charlotte Sterling sat motionless. Her reputation had always preceded her. In every gala, every conference, every exclusive boardroom across the country, she was Charlotte Sterling, sharp-tongued, immaculately dressed, a woman who shaped public opinion with a donation and controlled narratives with a smile. But tonight, her silence said more than all her speeches combined. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett stood surrounded by volunteers, young activists, and soft-spoken researchers who had waited the entire evening to simply share their stories with her. No cameras, no headlines, just voices that had found someone willing to listen. And she listened, patiently, kindly. Charlotte watched it all with a mixture of awe and shame. Not because Jasmine had shamed her, she hadn't even tried, but because Jasmine hadn't needed to prove anything. Her presence, her purpose, and the integrity in her voice had revealed everything Charlotte had failed to see. She felt like a ghost in her own world now. The guests had stopped fawning over her. The familiar nods and half bows she had grown used to, gone. People had turned towards something more sincere, and she knew deep down that the only way forward was through the humility she had spent her whole life avoiding. So she stood. Her heels no longer sounded like thunder across the floor. They sounded like surrender. As she approached Jasmine, her heart beat louder than any orchestra. Jasmine had just finished thanking a volunteer who had driven 600 miles to share data from a wolf sanctuary in Montana when she turned and saw her. Charlotte opened her mouth. No script, no plan, just truth. Congresswoman Crockett. Jasmine met her gaze, steady but open. Charlotte hesitated. Her voice was smaller than she remembered it ever being. I owe you something I should have offered the moment I walked into this place. Respect. I judged you, not just wrongly, but cruelly. And I can't take back what I said, But I need you to know, I see it now. I see you now. A hush fell over the nearby guests, but Jasmine, she remained composed, almost peaceful. She didn't fold her arms. She didn't smirk. She just looked at Charlotte. And in that look was something deeper than forgiveness. It was understanding. Charlotte, Jasmine said softly, this work we do, it isn't about being seen. It's about seeing what's broken, what's vulnerable, and asking ourselves if we're brave enough to protect it. Charlotte blinked. Those words hit harder than any criticism ever could, not because they were designed to hurt, but because they were rooted in something Charlotte had long forgotten: service. I want to be brave, she said. I want to stop performing and start participating. Tell me how I can help. Really help. Jasmine's smile wasn't wide, but it was real. Then start by showing up, she replied. Not for the photos, not for the plaques. Just show up. For the animals, for the mission, for the people who don't get invited to rooms like this. Charlotte nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Then I'll show up, she said, every time. For the first time in years, Charlotte Sterling didn't feel powerful. She felt useful. And that was the beginning of something far greater. Has someone ever surprised you by extending grace when you didn't expect it? Share your story in the comments. These are the moments that heal us, what we leave behind. The gala had long ended. The golden lights were dimming, tables half cleared. Servers whispered gently to each other as they folded napkins and stacked crystal glassware. But in the back of the Sequoia Grove Lodge, two women still sat, not as opponents, not as symbols, but as people. Jasmine Crockett and Charlotte Sterling. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, arms folded gently, her eyes resting on the empty stage where hours earlier she had given a speech that shifted the energy of an entire room. She hadn't aimed for applause, but she had spoken with a truth that couldn't be ignored. Charlotte sat beside her now, no longer the woman who had judged from a distance. Her designer gown wrinkled, her voice softer, her makeup slightly smudged, but she had never looked more human. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Charlotte eventually broke the silence with a whisper. You know, I used to think giving meant control. I thought writing a check gave me power. But tonight, it just made me feel small. Jasmine turned toward her, not surprised, but thoughtful. Giving isn't about the amount, she said. It's about whether it comes from guilt or from grace. The words didn't land like judgment. They landed like a lesson. Outside, a cold breeze rustled the trees, ancient trees that had stood through fire, wind, and time. Jasmine watched them for a moment, then stood. Charlotte followed. They walked slowly to the back patio, overlooking the edge of the sanctuary. The moonlight touched the treetops, and somewhere in the dark, the faint sound of coyotes echoed. All of this, Jasmine said, her voice barely louder than the wind, isn't mine. I just get to care for it while I'm here. Charlotte looked out across the vast land. And when you're gone, Jasmine smiled faintly, then someone else shows up. That's what matters. That someone shows up. It wasn't a speech. It was a legacy being handed over. Charlotte reached into her clutch and pulled out a small notepad, a list of names, a new donation, substantial, but more importantly, a list of commitments, weekly visits, board involvement, volunteer coordination. It wasn't performative, it was personal. She handed it to Jasmine. I'm not going to disappear after tonight, Charlotte said. You reminded me of who I was supposed to be, not the image, the actual me, and I want to build something real now. Jasmine looked down at the list, then at Charlotte. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just a nod. Then let's build it. The two women turned back toward the lodge, now nearly empty, but their steps weren't heavy with shame anymore. They were grounded in purpose. And as they disappeared into the quiet hallway, the message remained. We're not remembered by how many rooms we conquered. We're remembered by which ones we stayed in, when no one was watching. If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Let us know in the comments. What legacy do you want to leave behind? And if you're ready to hear more stories like this one, about truth, humility, and second chances, subscribe now. We'll be here telling them.